Thanks, Mark, and thanks for everyone for coming along tonight, and thanks to Greenpeace and everyone else associated with it. It's a fabulous gathering. Ladies and gentlemen, I joined the Liberal Party in 1989, and I remain a member to this day. But I never imagined that I would ever be campaigning against my party in a federal election campaign. But a continuation of John Howard's response to climate change is also unimaginable, and something I decided I couldn't support. My politics really haven't changed a great deal since 1989, but that can't be said of the Liberal Party's greenhouse policies. Now, I may be the only person who has an original copy of this document, but in 1989, when I joined the party led by Andrew Peacock, we had a policy to reduce Australia's greenhouse gas emissions by 20% by the year 2000. We were promising bigger cuts sooner than the Labor Party was, and our MPs, our Shadow Minister around the time, Senator Fred Cheney, was bragging in Parliament that it was the Liberal Party, not the Labor Party, that first embraced national emission reduction targets. This will surprise a few people as well. In the Fight Back package of John Hewson, when he led the party in the early 1990s, we actually retained that 20% emission reduction commitment. But today, as many of you know, John Howard's taken Australia's climate change policy in a very different and dangerous direction. But before I get into that, a little bit more about my background. I've spent most of my career in and around the Liberal Party federally, and since about 1994, immersed in environment policy, particularly Australia's response to climate change. First, I was the speechwriter for the first Howard Government Environment Minister, Robert Hill, as you've heard. I was then a consultant for the Environment Department federally, for the Australian Greenhouse Office. And I then lobbied for a range of different industries with a stake in the greenhouse debate. And then finally I was a PhD researcher at the ANU. So I got to see this all evolve from a range of different angles. I also thought, selfishly, that these would be good career steps. And not too many environment policy experts within the Liberal Party ranks, I can tell you. So I thought I could carve out a little niche for myself. And I had a political career in mind. But instead I found myself trying to ignore lots of pennies slowly dropping about how my party's response to climate change was shifting thanks to the influence of Australia's worst polluting industries, and how we were deceiving the public about the implications of that shift. Much of this was revealed to me in my PhD research, the conclusions of which were very unwelcome to me, as you can imagine, as a Liberal Party member. I raised my concerns with various senior members of the Howard government, but to no avail, and ultimately I faced a very difficult decision on whether or not I should self-censor my own PhD thesis for political reasons. In the end, I decided I couldn't do it. Then in early 2006, inevitably, some of my findings were aired on national television on the Greenhouse Mafia episode of Four Corners. From then on, it became pretty clear to me that my party was complicit in all of this rather than merely oblivious. The shutters came down on me and on any prospect of a political career in the near future. So after some reflection, I decided I had to write high and dry, because if the party didn't want to know about how its greenhouse policy was being hijacked, let alone the implications, then I thought the whole story of how John Howard was coming to confuse polluter interests with the national interest needed to be told. And it had to be told by someone on the inside. So I felt an obligation to my party, the party that had once had such a different policy. I felt an obligation to fellow Liberal Party voters who I felt sure would be as outraged as I was if they knew what was really going on. And I felt an obligation to my country and to my kids. But what was it that had me so worried in the first place? Well, I'm no scientist, and I'm not going to try to emulate Al Gore's slideshow. But I just want to touch on a couple of the aspects of the science quickly. First, it's becoming increasingly apparent that what we're seeing simply can't be accounted for by natural causes alone and natural variability. This slide shows two graphs from the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report looking at how observed increases in temperature, both globally and in Australia, fit within different climate change modelling scenarios. The light blue area shows the range of increases, and I apologise to people up the back who can't see this very well. The light blue area shows the range of increases you might expect if what we are seeing was was accounted for by natural causes alone. The pink range shows what you might expect if it was a combination of man-made and natural forces, and the black line shows what's actually happened. So, as you can see, while there used to be more overlap and perhaps more reason for disagreement and ambiguity, this is rapidly disappearing now in the last couple of decades, if not now completely gone. The second thing I want to highlight is the carbon dioxide data retrieved from the ice cores at Vostok and Dome Charlie bases in Antarctica. The blue lines here show the atmospheric concentrations of CO2, the red lines the temperature. And what we see is a clear correlation between greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere and rising temperatures, going back 650,000 years for both, and with temperatures we've got some data further back. While it's not all that clear on this graph because it covers such a long period of time, what the ice cores also show us is that in the past 200 years, concentrations of CO2 and other greenhouse gases are higher than anything we've seen in the last 650,000 years. Today they are flying off this scale. It's now clear that we're entering uncharted and very dangerous territory, thanks to greenhouse gas emissions generated by us, mainly from burning fossil fuels, but also from clearing forests, which would otherwise absorb large quantities of carbon dioxide. This brings me to the third thing I want to highlight with the science, and that is where we're currently headed. At present, the world is on course for CO2 levels in the atmosphere, concentrations, I should say, of over 1,000 parts per million, which is more than 3 times anything we've seen in the last 650,000 years. And as you can see from the upper limit of the ranges on the right of this graph, the IPCC is saying we could be on track for an average warming increase this century of 6 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. They also warn that when temperatures will last 3 to 5 degrees warmer for an extended period, sea levels rose 4 to 6 metres.